Let's move to this story. Labour's strategy of smashing the gangs. You may have heard that Mr Starmer wants to smash the gangs. It's now being questioned by Home Office officials. Civil servants in the department are said to have been underwhelmed by the approach by Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, with concerns people smugglers will just adapt and carry on. This comes, of course, as hundreds of foreign criminals convicted of murder, rape, child sex abuse have been allowed into Britain from abroad, according to police figures. Let's speak with Norman Baker, former Home Office Minister. Norman, good afternoon to you. You know your way around. You know your way around the Home Office. You know how these things work. You know, who can you trust? Who can't you trust? Whose ear have you got? You know, how much info do you know? Is too much information a bad thing, or is a little a good thing? All of the usual comings and goings of running a big department, etc. But when civil servants within that department question a ministerial position, what does that mean in reality? Where is the balance of power in the Home? I mean, ultimately with the Prime Minister, I suppose, but nonetheless, I'd imagine that's pretty unhelpful if you're Yvette Cooper, if your mandarins are going around saying something rather different.
Well, I mean, the traditional way that government operates is for civil servants to provide advice to ministers. Ministers can either reject or accept that advice, but it all happens behind closed doors. And we need to have a system that operates whereby civil servants can give honest opinions to the ministers and ministers can give honest opinions back, and the whole thing is kept in-house until such time as a policy decision is announced. You have to be able to talk to civil servants and game particular solutions, if you like, in the confidence it won't be leaked. So the fact that we're now hearing about civil servants not being happy with particular policies is actually a failure of government in the wider sense of how a government ought to operate. And of course we had massive leaks before the budget about various ministers wanting different bits and pieces. So, you know, the government's leaking like a sieve, which isn't very helpful to, you know, good government.
Indeed. And I suppose, you know, we live in very different times, don't we? It's 24-hour media, social media, people can post things, people can, you know, maybe feel more comfortable letting slip a little bit of info either to a journalist or somebody, more comfortable now than they perhaps ever have done.
Well, indeed, if you go back to the budget after the war, the minister at the time, the chancellor at the time, got sacked because one piece of information was released before the budget. Yeah. Now, basically, the whole budget was released in advance this time by the ministers. But this is the kind of yes minister verb, isn't it? I brief, you leak, he commits defence under the Official Secrets Act. Yeah. So the different standards apply to different people. I mean, in terms of the policy itself, which I guess you want to talk about, Ian, I mean, smash the gangs is just one of these new phrases. Politicians are now latching onto these three-word phrases, you know, get Brexit done, stop the boats, smash the gangs, and it's a soundbite.
Yeah, it really is. And I wonder whether frustration of civil servants in this case, I know over the last couple of years civil servants have got a pretty bad press, and I appreciate there's maybe arguments about how over-bloated some departments are, but I'm also absolutely sure that most civil servants are, you know, fairly diligent, honest people who want to do the job they've been hired to do. But there's clearly some stragglers, some professional public servants out there who are just waiting for that gold-plated pension. But on balance, I'm sure there's some decent folk there. There must be times, Norman, when they, and I think perhaps Brexit was a good example of that, where they thought, regardless of whether they were pro or against as individuals, the sheer level of bureaucracy required to put it into action was so enormous that we began to hear that civil servants are maybe briefing against the government. And similarly with this, you know, smash the gangs, which is ultimately, you know, if you stuck that in a dissertation on its own, you'd be kicked out of university, as I always seem to say. It doesn't really mean anything, you know. When you look at it and analyse it and try and imagine it in action, the point that apparently these civil servants are making is not an unreasonable one. It's the air bubble effect. It's the same with drug cartels. You know, you can close one down, another one pops up, and I sense it's maybe frustration from them, Norman, that is at work here.
It may be, and I'm not quite clear, and I've tried to follow these things quite closely, exactly what smash the gangs means. Yeah. What exactly is involved in that? I've not seen a plan for it. I've heard the phrase repeated numerous times, but what does it actually mean? So there is a serious issue about that, and no doubt the frustration which we're hearing is partly due to that.
I would imagine it probably is, and I do sense that Keir Starmer, I mean, I have noticed, I don't know whether this is something you've picked up on, Norman, but Yvette Cooper and Keir Starmer, I get it, it's in their political DNA to not maybe go down the same route as the Conservatives would have done, but they don't say very much about the actual crossings, and it seems that their way to appear to be onto it is to talk about the gangs, almost as if this is people trafficking in the sort of servitude sense. And that way it sounds like they've got a gauge on it.
Well, I mean, smashing gangs in the abstract is actually quite a sensible idea. You want to get back to the origin of where people are coming from rather than deal with it at the last moment. Stop the boats implies that they're already at Dover and on the way to Dover from Calais, and you haven't stopped them at that point. So going one stage back is a logical thing to do. But there's an economic factor here, which is that as long as people will make a lot of money from charging people to come across the channel, and they rip these people off. Some of the poorest people in the world are being charged a fortune to get on these unseaworthy boats. It's quite disgraceful. And as long as you're making money from it, the traffickers, and as long as the chances of being caught and prosecuted are minimal, then they're going to carry on doing it.
Yeah.
That's the reality of economics.
Absolutely. And I'd also like to think, Norman, that stopping gangs, I mean, this is already an existing criminal activity. I think most countries' intelligence department and police forces, particularly in Northern Europe, Belgium, France, etc., are already on to trying to smash the gangs, as have our border security services as well. I mean, that in itself is not new, but it is a new soundbite.
It is. I mean, we have to work with our European neighbours because the people are coming through European countries in nearly all cases. It makes sense to share intelligence, to work in a cooperative way. Some of that, I'm afraid, was damaged after Brexit because the relations between the UK and the EU deteriorated at that point. I think they're coming back a bit now, but we need to have absolute cooperation across the channel between Britain and France in particular. So in that sense, I was pleased that Keir Starmer's been to France 3 times to see Macron since the election, because they are our nearest neighbour, and what they do is actually important to what happens in this country. So we need to engage with them.
Norman, thank you. Norman Baker, he's a former Home Office Minister with us on the programme.